I'm Joan Parker, the President and CEO of Counterpart International. And it is my honor to welcome you all to the Counterpart convening around Afghanistan. And it has been a pleasure for us to see this group come together today. And we see an extraordinary group of people around this table from different sectors. From the government of Afghanistan, from the think tank world, from the implementing partners, from the diplomatic world. Many friends around the table. Glad to see you. And this is a conversation for us to share visions going forward, but also lessons from the past. Counterpart's happy to convene in part because of our experience in Afghanistan since 2004. So it's a pleasure that you have in front of you this, which is not for reading here, but I hope you do take it and enjoy it as you go forward after today's conversation. And I thank you in advance for also recognizing that we are taping. So this is something that please do, if you have something that you feel needs to be off the record, please say so that we can omit it from the official version. I appreciate that. But from Counterpart, welcome to all. And I'm going to hand over to Mehreen Farooq, who is going to welcome all of you more specifically. Mehreen.
Great. So thank you, Joan, and I will do my best to project my voice. But if anyone has a hard time hearing me, just politely raise your hand. So thank you again for coming today and joining us for this really timely discussion that we're having against the backdrop of the Afghan peace framework as well as the upcoming presidential elections. And so I'm reminded that once again, Afghanistan is at this pivotal point in its history. It's once again at a crossroads, which essentially affords us another opportunity to consider how we can leverage from our investments in civil society strengthening to support the peaceful future of this country. So towards this end, we're launching our latest report, The Steady March of Progress, Best Practices, Tools, Techniques to Engage Civil Society in Afghanistan. And this essentially highlights over 14 years experience and lessons learned in strengthening the sector. I have a few prepared remarks on the report, but then I really look forward to hearing from all of you on some of the challenges and opportunities that we've all experienced and observed working in Afghanistan. As Joan mentioned, we're really honored to have such esteemed guests amongst us. We have our colleagues from the Embassy of Afghanistan, we have colleagues from USAID, and from Counterpart, Joan and I are joined by Sibel Berzeg, who's our Vice President of Global Growth. She actually recently just returned from a trip from Afghanistan about a week ago, right? And then we have Nourhan Kojuolu, who's our Senior Program Manager for Afghanistan Programs. And then we also have Mark Granius, who's our Technical Director of Civil Society Strengthening, and others. And we're also, of course, very pleased to have several of our implementing partners with us here today. We have colleagues from Internews, we have folks from ICNL and the Afghan Network, amongst others. So welcome again to everybody. I'm very excited to be moderating today's event. As some of you know, about 5 years ago, I led a study on Afghan community-based peacebuilding models to prevent radicalization, which essentially led me through a wild cross-country tour to 14 provinces, mostly by road, without any security detail. My parents only heard about half of it when I returned. But during that time, I really had the pleasure of meeting with so many amazing civil society activists, tribal elders, religious scholars. And the one thing that kept kind of, coming up was the number of folks who had benefited from Counterpart assistance. And so looking back, as our report notes, Afghanistan civil society has truly come a long way. CSOs not only have the institutional capacity and the financial responsibility to receive and manage grants, but they're now leading advocacy efforts to improve public policies, and they're leveraging the media to strengthen accountability. Most strikingly, with all our investments in inclusive civic education, today, more women and traditionally underrepresented groups have a voice in shaping their future and are willing now to take the Taliban on to ensure that the country doesn't backslide again to a repressive regime. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, hundreds of women convened in Kabul for a women's durga organized by the Afghan Women's Network, following a nationwide movement to identify key priorities, red lines, and demands to later feed into the national peace process. And I really think that none of us could have imagined this taking place 19 years ago. So that is really a commendable accomplishment. The report considers other accomplishments, but here I want to just highlight 3. So the first is really an increased capacity of youth to be civil leaders. We've been working with a cadre of emerging civil society leaders, or ECSLs as we like to call them, and through leadership development trainings, exchanges, and small grants, we've been struck by how they're transforming their communities. A 2018 survey of some of our alumni found that 87% of those surveyed indicated that they became more active in their communities as a result of the program. And 70% stated that they became a member of an organization or a volunteer of another organization following their involvement. Some have even been as bold as to run for parliament. And we're very pleased to note that, in fact, 2 of our ECSLs actually won their seats in the last election. Program alumni also serve on regional peace councils and have gone on to coordinate local peace-building efforts, from radio programs on reconciliation to hosting public debates in universities to promote critical thinking. And many of the initiatives that our ECSL are taking on are really based on appreciative inquiry. This is an assets-based approach that enables participants to take stock of and leverage their local resources to achieve change. And in the coming months, we intend to provide 2 peace-building grants that increase youth involvement in peace-building and national reconciliation, because we believe that continuing these investments in youth will ensure growth, innovation, and vibrancy of the civil society sector. Second, I'd like to highlight our multi-sectoral partnerships and networks that utilize a systemic approach to development. For the past 6 years, Counterpart has provided technical support to the Civil Society Joint Working Group, which essentially serves as a key interlocutor between civil society and the government. Initially, starting in Kabul, with about 550 members, this model is currently being expanded across the country to establish regional working groups in Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, Jalalabad, Kandahar, and Bamiyan. And in the next few months, we intend to really increase communication between these civil society working groups and the High Peace Council, which of course is the key body responsible for reconciliation efforts with the militants. And we intend to really leverage these working groups as opportunities to hear what's happening on the ground. You know, what do communities want out of this peace process? Third, we're supporting the development of stronger, more vibrant, and independent media. So Counterpart has worked with key media stakeholders to achieve significant gains in improving access to information, particularly in rural areas, and developing the capacity of media to provide higher quality content. Our partner Internews also supports citizen engagement around public policy, expanding community radio programs, which have been tremendously popular, and producing timely content on vital issues from civic engagement, elections, and peace negotiations. And the reason why I want to highlight this in particular is because this really has created a structure, different channels through which Afghans themselves can socialize concepts of reconciliation, where they can highlight the cost of war, and they can share their hopes and their dreams for the peaceful future of their country. Now, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that the picture is not all rosy. Afghanistan is still a hard operating environment, and local CSOs continue to face increasing insecurity. Several local partners surveyed in a recent study we did in the winter relayed hesitation to participate in upcoming election activities because of the worsening security. In fact, one of our local partners noted, quote, "After conducting an election awareness campaign in Kalat city in Zabul province, I received 4 warnings from the Taliban on Facebook Messenger to stop supporting this democratic process. And after that, I decreased my activities in the sector." So to address this, CSOs are interested in safety training. They're interested in improving access and communication with the security sector so that they can begin to exchange information and be kept abreast of emerging threats. One way civil society activists have found greater security is through operating in networks or cluster groups. This essentially affords members greater flexibility with making demands semi-anonymously as part of a larger group. So identifying avenues to support these networks is something for us to consider. Another challenge is the widening rift between Kabul-centered donor service organizations and the more rural, informal, often volunteer-based organizations. I think the latter have stronger ties to their constituencies, no doubt. The former have stronger relationships with the international community, but both have something to offer. However, with international investments to the civil society sector expected to decrease, there is likely to be less coordination and more pressure to compete between these groups for limited resources. So looking forward, we must consider how can we incentivize collaboration through innovative mechanisms like public-private partnerships, consortia with universities, or collaborative associations that share costs and resources amongst their networks. So I share these opportunities and challenges really as a starting point today for us. And for our discussion, I'd like to posit 5 questions to kind of anchor our discussion. So the primary question for us to consider is, how can we sustain these investments of the international community, all this great work that we've accomplished together over the past 18 years? Our report highlights some recommendations. Here I'll highlight just a few. So I'll start with capacity building. Over the past 14 years, Counterpart has provided technical assistance to build up CSOs so that they can promote democracy and human rights. These are essentially priority issues that we, as an international community, determined were of importance. But now we need to consider how can we provide targeted support for CSOs to respond to the needs of their communities. When it comes to peace building, which is top of mind across the board for civil society activists, some of our local partners noted that they would benefit from conflict resolution training, along with negotiation and consensus building. Technical guidance on fostering social cohesion was also identified as a critical need. And youth civil society leaders noted an interest in communications training so that they can better represent their community priorities in peacebuilding efforts. Our report notes the importance of continued capacity building efforts through technical assistance, through peer learning and exchange opportunities. And again, it also notes that we should consider incentivizing places where we can cost share, pool resources, crowdfund, engage in more of the peer-to-peer learning activities, so that we can eventually mitigate the donor dependency that has developed over the years, and to really encourage these initiatives to be locally driven. Now, of course, some people may ask, why support to Afghanistan civil society is important and should remain a priority investment. The answer, I think, lies in something that Ambassador Hamdallah Mohib, the Afghan National Security Advisor, noted last week at the Hudson Institute. And he said, the key to Afghanistan's success will be an Afghan-led, an Afghan-controlled, and an Afghan-owned process. So as most of us know, civil society plays an essential role in each step of the way there. Civil society is vital for strengthening democratic institutions and supporting smooth political transitions. Civil society often fills the gap of service delivery, whether it's providing maternal health, expanding education opportunities for young boys and girls, and improving food security in hard-to-reach places where the central government may have limited writ. Civil society is also vital for peace building, of course, for supporting alternative dispute mechanisms, for reintegrating militants, for establishing peaceful venues for policy, debate, and dialogue. And of course, civil society and the media play a vital role in inculcating positive messages of tolerance, inclusion, and reconciliation. But again, notwithstanding its immense potential, CSOs often feel sidelined in major discussions about the future of their country. So another question for us to consider is, how can we foster an environment where civil society plays an active role in shaping the implementation of the peace framework so that it's not perceived as a top-down foreign directive? Fortunately, as our report indicates, the international community's broad investments in civil society strengthening, I think, has really laid the groundwork for Afghans to directly inform the peace process. A lot of our work, whether it's through leadership, communications, or other soft skills development, has really equipped our community stakeholders to identify and prioritize their community's needs, to advocate, negotiate, and build consensus on key issues. So moving forward, I also encourage us to consider how can we ensure youth have a seat at that table? Our younger partners frequently note that youth, who comprise 65% of the population, often get sidelined in national level dialogues by older, more traditional stakeholders. The High Peace Council, for example, does not often engage the youth, and nor does the government or the Taliban. One of our ECSL suggested that youth should be afforded an opportunity to conduct a national conference on peace to share their views with the government and the Taliban. So what other ways can youth shape their future? Another question CSOs are grappling with is their engagement with religious actors. This is something we don't often discuss in DC, but the Taliban have noted that they want a high ulama council to review each law in accordance with Islamic principles. So how can the US and international community work with religious leaders to ensure that democracy and human rights gains are maintained? What are the lessons learned from our religious leader engagement to date, and how can we apply those moving forward? And finally, it's important to note, or really to emphasize here, that there is a lot riding on this peace process. When asked what could be done to improve the peace and security of communities, our local partners most often responded a peace deal with the Taliban and the government. So finally, how can the US and the international community build on the Taliban's interest in cultivating foreign assistance for the country's reconstruction, while also ensuring that the democratic and human rights gains are not lost? Many in Afghanistan fear that these gains might be lost if the Taliban, rather than the democratically elected officials or representatives of civil society, determine the contours of their country's peaceful future. So I know I've suggested a number of questions for us to consider. So I'll end there, but before I open the floor for comments, I'd like to ask if Sibel might share with us some additional perspectives from our stakeholders from her recent trip.
Thanks, Mehreen. I have the wonderful advantage of having worked on my very first project design in 2005 with Counterpart was our Afghanistan project. So some of the partners that we have there on the ground are still partners of ours today. And I've managed to be lucky enough to see our key partners grow from 2 to 12 to 40. And the change that I've been able to see over the years in our work there and the growth of civil society has been really, it's been really heartening. And I would say when I go to Kabul, I get the partners that we work with together pretty much every time that I manage to visit. And I sit with them and I just touch base with them on how is the environment now, how are you feeling, what are the changes that you see, what are the most urgent needs, what are your biggest concerns about what's happening now. And I was able to do this with about 30 CSOs in my last visit. So I'm going to share with you some perspectives of theirs and some perspectives of some of the donors that I met with. These are not necessarily my own opinions, but I'll share them with you from the perspective of those who shared them with me. The real concern right now is that they feel that they're being sidelined in the peace talks. They feel that the Taliban have sidelined the government. They basically, as we understand the Taliban, don't want to give Ghani any credit for the peace talks, so they're sidelining the government in the conversation. They're doing the same with civil society because they also refuse to recognize the legitimacy of civil society, particularly those that are affiliated with donor funding. So those that are working with us or other community partners, they feel that they're being sidelined. There are some other smaller groups that don't feel they're being sidelined, but they don't yet feel that they have enough of a voice in the peace process to make it impactful or credible in some way. This raises tremendous fear for them because they feel that all of the work that they've done in the past 2 decades is at risk of being eroded or erased completely. You've heard it from the statements that have been made by the women's groups. You can hear the same thing when you talk with CSOs in Kabul. They say, we've worked so hard to get where we are, and if the donors pull out funding and we don't have a seat at the table, we could lose everything. We could end up in a worse position than we are right now. They also ask quite quite straightforwardly, why are the Americans talking with the Taliban? You're the ones who have been in the trenches with us, helping to reverse the tide of what's happening. Why are they talking with the Taliban? The challenge seems to be still how to bring all the right people to the table and get them to really listen to each other and put their best thinking toward what the solution is that's somehow a compromise between what hardliners think is the right way. And that, I think, it remains a huge challenge. The other thing that they're clearly very concerned about is their sustainability. As all of us know, so many billions of dollars have poured into the Afghan economy that a lot of CSOs are used to having salaries that are higher than everyone else. They're used to having cars and they're used to having projects that are supported by us, and they're doing great work. It's hard for them to understand how they're going to make that sustainable in the local economy if all those donor dollars go away. They say to me, you know, America's democracy took hundreds of years. We've had 20 years. We're like a toddler. You can't pull the support from us now. And it's the same thing with the peace talks discussion. If you pull the support now, we're going to end up with nothing. We'll end up back where we were, years ago with a lot of the gains that we've made just eroded. So that's the other thing that was a major concern. The other thing that I heard about a year ago when I was out there is there was a glimmer of hope because the government was bringing in a lot of civil society leaders into government to work in government posts. And there was a little bit of skepticism because it's like the government is co-opting civil society into its ranks. Could this be a good thing or could this be a really bad thing? Because the civil society leaders are pulled out of civil society into the government. But if they have a voice in the government, then that's great, right? If they credibly have a voice. A year later, I talked with those partners, and they say that those civil society people are completely co-opted by government now. And they're the worst people in the government going after civil society. Again, this is their perspective, but I found it very interesting. So those are some of my high-level takeaways from my recent conversations. I'm happy to answer any further or follow-up you might have about any of those conversations.
Thank you, Sibel. No, I think it's really important to have that view from the ground, which I think is often untold. And I think that, you hit on a number of things about how, we have to find a way to peace, and often we tend to overlook the fact that peace building is messy. It requires uncomfortable conversations with uncomfortable partners at times. And so how can we ensure that we have the right folks at the table at the right time for those conversations? And you also touched on the question of CSO sustainability. So with that, I do want to give a chance to open the floor, and I'm looking to our colleagues around the table here. If there's something you'd like to add to the conversation to respond to one of the questions, something that you've recently heard from your work in Afghanistan. If you would like to speak, you can just raise your, flip your tent card like this, and I'm happy to call in individuals, on a first come, first serve basis. So, please.
So, just what Sibel you've mentioned, I was in Kabul twice last year for evaluations of USAID projects, just to find people that you can talk to. Most of the country is closed to expats. So the only places we can go to is Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, and Kabul, and easily talk to people there. So just the logistical effort, the people you talk to, are their opinions reflective of the entire country's general population's perspectives? So the information we have been getting for some of the evaluations that I was part of, the projects generally, USAID funded projects, are in these major provinces where you can operate and go. So the views that we get to hear are from the same provinces, three or four. Mm-hmm. And so just to understand the bigger puzzle, we just have information, very small information that we can get a hold of. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I intended to say.
Yeah. Mehreen, can I get you to speak just briefly on the coverage of our partners and of the coverage of the partners for the project?
Sure. I think it would be helpful to kind of
Sort of give a
sense of how we've leveraged our adaptive
cascading model to really pull up those voices from the ground and through our eyes, those regional partners up to the top.
So, Sonal, as you were saying earlier, Counterpart in Afghanistan has been an evolutionary process. It started 14 years ago. Can everyone hear me?
Nope, just
Okay. I'll sit, but I'll speak louder. And basically, currently, what it's evolved to right now in this iteration of the Civil Society project we're implementing is 27 of the 34 provinces that we're in, which really has grown. We weren't involved in these 27s from the get-go. The outreach and provincial partners that we are working with has expanded tremendously. It's about 41 right now. We have regional partners who we've partnered with in previous projects whose capacity has grown so that they in turn are now helping these smaller, more provincial CSOs. And so a lot of the information we've gathered is really from voices from within these 27 provinces, which, to a certain extent you're correct, it's still sort of piece and they do vary, but overall sort of this effort and focus to really be a part forward in this process.
It's fair enough, though, to say that whenever you're speaking with the group, you never know if they're reflecting the voice of those they work with or their own voice. So your point is taken.
One more thing I wanted to add for the organizations is these are the organizations that we are speaking with, but they too have said that when they're working with their beneficiaries and some of the citizens, and this is not all provinces because every province is also affected differently. I mean, there are also those citizens that just want peace at whatever cost because they're so tired. They've been affected far more than maybe other citizens and other communities and other provinces. So it's juggling all of those inputs.
I think it's a very unique advantage that you have because you've been working in Afghanistan for a long time. So you have built those relationships. If you go in for just a small project, sometimes it's hard to do. But Counterpart has this advantage.
Ambassador Samak, please.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having all of us around this table and having a few Afghans here as well, which sort of matters, I think. But as someone I'm old enough to have been involved with Afghanistan issues for the past 4 decades, believe it or not. There was a time when we went out and started talking about women's rights and democracy building and people's this and civil society. I remember the times in Washington, not long ago, 20 years ago or so, when there was nobody around the table. There wasn't. And nobody was listening. And so some individuals, some organizations like Feminist Majority and others got involved, and today we are where we are. Having said this, I want to focus your attention knowing where most of you are coming from, what you've done, the services that you have rendered, the work and the help that you've given to the Afghan people, the women, the children, the youth. And I, as an Afghan, very much appreciate that. And I hope you can continue to do so in the future, and that conditions will be easy enough and productive enough so that you can do so, and that the international engagement is not going to go away. But the question, obviously, I'm putting myself in your shoes. The question that comes up right now is, what is happening? Where is this going? Whether it's the peace process, the political part of it, what kind of change is going to take place in Afghanistan? Is there going to be a change in the political order? Is there going to be a change in governance structures? How much of the international engagement is going to still be there after whatever transition we go through? But what I would obviously like to tell you is that you have to look at it from the perspective of business not as usual. So it's not, I don't think that the way forward is going to be business as usual. I think the way forward is going to be something very different. To what extent, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I think that there are a lot of lessons that have been learned by all of us, especially Afghans, over the last 2-3 decades or more. I think that we are going to have changes that are going to take place. And they are going to fundamentally alter the way some work is being done in Afghanistan. And obviously, some of it has to be rooted in ground realities. Right now, I'm sure all of you know that if you ask, if you do a survey, the overwhelming majority, some people say even 90%, say that peace is a priority. What does that mean? If peace is a priority, it means that the core of Afghanistan's population thinks that they've had enough of violence. That violence has to end. And so the question is, how do we end violence? And how do we make sure that the fundamental gains of the last 2 decades and some of the critical work that some of you have done, and I'm not going to say that all of your work has been critical. Some of the critical work that has been done, because there's been a lot of waste, unfortunately, is going to be preserved and protected. And it will have enough political backing in that we will be able to convince those who are against this or that they cannot touch them. They cannot touch this project or this particular sector of the society that has seen progress. So it's going to be negotiated. So the next step is going to be negotiations taking place mainly amongst the Afghans. There will be others obviously playing their role. And so it's in that negotiation, probably on a table like this, where maybe hundreds, if not dozens of Afghans are going to sit and on behalf of their communities and their social, political entities are going to try to come up with the best result. And that's, whether we want it or not, I think that's going to happen. And so from your perspective, you have to see how change is taking place, how you need to adjust your activities, how you need to plan and strategize for the future, and help us while we help you try to reach a point where at the end of the day we can build on what has already been done. But there's going to be change, and I think that we are going to have to be ready.
That's a great point. I think that understanding that there will have to be a tilt towards, we've invested so much as an international community in building up civil society, building up these democratic institutions and policies and procedures, and now we have to allow that system to flourish to some extent. So, one of the questions that we've had with some of our colleagues in Kabul has been, the prospect of the Loya Jirga. Right, so who's a part of that process? What is the nature of those conversations? And there seems to be a lot of uncertainty about that as well, because there isn't really a readily available public knowledge of the criteria of that participation. Who's going to be part of that process? How will the findings from that be then taken, to the next level of negotiation? So I'm sure that also adds to a lot of the uncertainty in country. Marjorie, please.
Going back to your comment, I think one of the major investments that has been made has been in the media itself, especially media outside of Kabul. I look at the Salam Watandar network, which is a direct result of this investment. That's in every province. Just a few years ago, there were 5 women-owned radio stations. Now there are 17 women-owned and operated radio stations across the country. And the ability for them to connect back with the central hub with Salam Watandar in Kabul and push information in 2 directions actually is a really critical platform when we're having conversations around peace processes, the ability to listen and to hear voice, women's voice, youth voice, and voices from the province. So we've been working with them since their very origins, and they're working hard together with our other partners to find a path to sustainability. Our experience, we work in many crisis-ridden places, and these are not real economies. They are not economies that necessarily support traditional media in the way that they can operate in a functioning economy. And anyone who's following the trajectory for media, they're not operating well and functioning economies either. So our as we look at this, we hope that we can come together and find ways to look at their sustainability, to help them find solutions, but just to acknowledge the significant investment and critical role that they have in this process.
Our colleague names.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with such a knowledgeable group of people here. I just wanted to add to some of the comments that made by Ambassador Samad and Mr. Babar. I think it's very clear that we are going to see change in Afghanistan, and it will be rather rapid change, and we have to prepare for it. But there is a big point there that we have to get the voice of Afghans heard, and that's the point that was raised by Babar. How many Afghans and how wide is the spectrum of Afghans that we can reach to? You said about 3 provinces. Even if you go more than 3 provinces, there are people whose voice need to be heard in the entire country. And I think there are at least 2 groups of people that we really need to hear their voice. Earlier this morning, we had a conversation with some of our colleagues in the embassy, and the conversation was about why do media change their direction. They have been supportive of some of the things that the government would do or the U.S. Embassy would do in Kabul or some of the policies of the U.S. government. But they are now criticizing the Afghan government. They are now criticizing the U.S. government and the U.S. Embassy in Kabul to the extent that they have never done so, because they are seeing some sort of uncertainty about their future. They somehow blame the U.S. government for taking them out of the loop for the peace process, and what is the destiny of them, what is the fate for the media in Afghanistan. But also they blame the Afghan government for not doing enough to maintain their presence in the peace talks. Similarly, I think the civil societies, you highlighted that they are also very much concerned. The Afghan people are concerned, and I think that also more and more highlights the importance of taking this. We are going to see change again, but we have to take the voice of the Afghan people, and we have to let the Afghans to decide about their future. I have also a point about the concept of peace for Afghan people, and this is also coming back to the people in different areas of Afghanistan. I think if you approach people in places with more stability, like in Bamiyan and central Afghanistan, what you hear from them is peace meaning better services, access to public health, access to schools for our children closer to our houses. But if you go to the people whose life has been affected by the insurgency and the terrorism, some of them who lost their loved ones, they want justice. That justice is peace for them. And those who didn't lose anyone, but their lives are affected, they want stability and progress. They want a different Afghanistan than what we did. So it's very important that before going towards that change, we define the limits, the limits of our compromise. We define, where would be those lines that we want to cross. Because at this time, it seems that a very limited number of people are sitting across the table drawing those lines, and people, entire people of Afghanistan, media, youth, civil society organizations, all of them, and the Afghan government are left out of those circles. And that is important. I mean, we have to involve all these groups.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, Janice, if I could potentially put you on the spot, because I know that Search has recently started a new project in Afghanistan, really kind of looking at conflict analysis and working with communities to build peace. And I think it would be a good opportunity based on what our colleague said of how peace means different things to different people in different parts of the country. So what are some of the things that you're seeing on the ground?
Sure. So we are just getting started. So I can give kind of a background of what the project will look like, but I unfortunately can't share really any insights at this point. But the idea of our project is to identify what peace means to different people in 6 different provinces and get an idea of what peace building approaches might be most effective in each place. And then reporting back on that. So we're working with local CSOs in different provinces
to really identify at the outset what are the challenges people are facing, what are their priorities in their daily lives or what they hope for the future, and then using seed grants to do small peace building projects in each place, and then really reporting back with recommendations on what worked, what didn't work, what could be worth further investment in the future. So taking this as really a learning opportunity and taking stock of what is working right now and what could really be useful in the future.
Thanks. Sibel, did you want to add?
Yeah, I have a question for some of our colleagues around the table. I wanted to ask our two former USAID mission directors what your perspective is on, since the time that you were in the field working at the mission until now, what have been some of the great achievements that you've seen take place, and what have been some of the real challenges that aid has struggled with in terms of trying to move things ahead in Afghanistan? And I'd like to ask the same questions to our colleagues from the Embassy of Afghanistan. What do you think have been some of the real successes and some of the real challenges that still lay ahead?
I defer to Earl Gass. I yield back the balance of my time.
Let's see, my time was very limited. I was there during the surge, so it was the largest development program in USAID's history. And it was at a time when we had great access. I could go anywhere I wanted. And oh, sorry. It was at a time, I was there during the surge, 2010, 2011. It was almost an unmanageable task because we had so many civilians who were out in the field trying to work with the military. I myself, in August, when everyone else was on leave, I decided that I was going to spend several weeks at the forward operating bases where the battles were being fought. And so I deeply got an appreciation for the work that people were doing at the field level. Not the national programs, but the peace building programs. And there are a couple of lessons that were learned, and that is, if you're doing peace building, all of you, USIP, for example, sitting around the table, you know this, but I had a chance to see it. It has to be local, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, but it does cost a lot of time and effort and dedication to doing that. So that was one thing that I thought, and it needs to be sustained. One thing that was working well, but unfortunately, as the U.S. started pulling back, there wasn't a lot of support in those areas that were frontline, if you will, frontline provinces or districts. Also, I felt at the same time that we were doing countering extremist type activities, we could also do development work. It was a unique time in U.S. history in Afghanistan, in that we had billions of dollars for resources. And so for me, I was looking at how could we make wise foundational investments that would be sustained throughout time. And that would be in education, it would be in infrastructure, electricity, and power. I'm currently with Creative Associates and have been able to see an implementing partner collaborating with Counterpart on the ground, but working in the education field, and to me working with the Ministry of Education when I was there 6-7 years ago, and where it is now, we can see that they're far along. Like the Ministry of Education, for example, is pretty far along on the journey towards self-reliance. They are doing the curriculum development. They are developing the materials. We are the financiers. And just one, if I could make one final point on the concern of civil society in Afghanistan about the lack of continued investment. In my own view, that is the last thing that one stops funding as a donor. So support to civil society should continue all the way up to the end point, because you want a thriving, independent civil society, and the risk is that you lose that.
In the best traditions of Washington, D.C., I'm going to take Sybil's excellent question and then answer the question I want to answer anyway. But first of all, let me say to your question, Ambassador Samad is right. I mean, the donors have done some good things and they've done some lousy things over the years. I find it interesting, early on, the decision was made to work with Afghan leaders and the Afghan central bank to try to create some stability for the Afghani. And actually, the Afghani has been amazingly stable for a decade and a half. It's an astonishing accomplishment. There are countries with nowhere near the level of conflict as in Afghanistan, and where the currency has been all over the place. But this has been a signal accomplishment, primarily led by the Afghan leaders themselves, but also with support from the outsiders. In other areas like building schools in the countryside, it's been chaotic. Military forces have been building schools. 10 different donors have been building schools. If I was the Minister of Education in Afghanistan, I would be driven crazy by the school building going on in the countryside. It's been chaotic. So I think the ambassador's correct. The donors have done some good things. They've done some confusing, counterproductive things, which is, not so unusual in this kind of operating environment. So the question I would like to ask you, Mehreen, is let's assume, I was at the Center for Strategic and International Studies last week, and the speaker was Kiran Skinner. Dr. Skinner is the new head of policy at the State Department. She was making a speech against nation building, reflecting the thinking of the Trump administration. Her response was, you people are doing development for the sake of development instead of supporting the primary political objectives of the country. So let's assume that the surveys are correct. The Afghan people want peace as the highest priority. I was thinking when Marjorie was talking about women-owned radio stations. Well, as a general rule, all things considered, I think that's good to have women-owned radio stations. But if the primary objective is peace, is that contributing to peace or not contributing to peace? So my question is, of all of the civil society organizations in Afghanistan, let's say that I hope the government gets much more engaged in the peace process. Let's say there is a consensus around the highest priorities for achieving peace in Afghanistan. Is there some way to mobilize the civil society organizations across Afghanistan in support of the peace process? Because by definition, they are local community organizations. And several commentators have said, well, that peace is defined differently in different communities and there are different priorities. But wouldn't it be great if there is a consensus led by the Afghan government, I hope, that the civil society organizations were supporting it and not opposing it? What can you do? What can Counterpart do? What can the donor community do to try to get many voices all supporting the same highest priority for the Afghan people? I yield back the balance of my time.
No, I certainly appreciate the question. I do want to give our colleague from the embassy a chance to respond first to Sibel's question, then we'll come back to what you had suggested.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure, honor for me to be here. Let me thank you for the great support and all the investments you've made in Afghanistan. I assure you that your investments, your time, is not being wasted. I would like to just list some of the achievements and gains we got due to the great support of your people and your organizations. Let me tell you at the beginning that Counterpart, Internews, and of course USA is very familiar names in Afghanistan. And Internews is an outstanding organization which their support for media development in Afghanistan is amazing. It is amazing. Maybe you can count it as an example for the whole world, developing world. Our achievements like civil society, freedom of media, and also practicing elections. Of course, we had difficult elections, but we practiced. We are a team democracy, as you just severally mentioned. Only 17, 18 years. What the world expects from us. We cannot provide more than this. We need goodwill, patience, and sustainable support. We will be a good partner for the world, definitely. The peace talks, yes, it's concerning for you and for us. Your country invested a lot of money, and so many heroes actually lost their lives or injured during their service in Afghanistan. We appreciate so much, and we know what does it mean. So our concern is why we lose or leave all the achievements and gains. We shouldn't, just leave everything we got and go. Of course, peace is our primary object, but what price we are going to pay for peace? It is very important. This is the biggest question. We shouldn't just close our eyes to the achievements and gains we have in the ground. Afghanistan 2019 is not Afghanistan 2001. Our generation, my generation, we are the change. It's very important. So please be patient. Keep supporting Afghanistan. It means a lot to us, and of course to the future of humanity and to the future of our global, wellness. I don't know if yes, the women engagement, one of the, it's amazing, women engagement in Afghanistan. Taliban used to wipe women, shot them in public, but now women are leading Afghanistan. So many important government and non-government positions, including our ambassadors. We have Ambassador Roya Rahmani as our first woman ambassador in Washington, D.C., and Adela Raz as our permanent ambassador envoy to the United Nations. They're amazing. It's amazing. We should not lose our hope. Just please keep it up. You are doing great. Thank you so much.
I'm certainly encouraged to hear, the appreciation that, various stakeholders have had of the work that, the international community has been trying to grapple with. I think one of the challenges, going to Jim's question, is this notion that there is, a singular concept of what peace is, because there's sort of a unified challenge. But, I think this has been the historical struggle of Afghanistan, is we keep trying to superimpose this very centralized concept of what governance looks like, of what peace building looks like. And we have to acknowledge that, the root of a lot of these conflicts, the reason why people are supporting groups like the Taliban, is because of unmet localized grievances. And similarly, we need to work with communities, at that grassroots level to help address, improve, service provision, help build bridges of, communication with the public sector. And all of these things, as you said, will take time. Marvin, please.
Yeah. Sorry I was not here this morning, but particularly during this conversation, I couldn't be here this morning. Peace is a very alluring concept. As they say, it's a piece of the graveyard. I don't think really we'll want to use peace as the highest objective, because there's already been indicated all kinds of peace. And I think what we're really talking about is security. I think everyone wants security. I think everybody wants opportunity. And with that, justice as well. So I think those three really are a better goal than simply the idea of peace.
I was in Afghanistan when the Taliban were in control. Not for very long, fortunately, for my sake. It was very peaceful. There wasn't a woman on the street. Oh, there were a couple of begging, elderly women begging. Otherwise, all the time I was there, I never saw a woman on the street. This is calm. It was Flower Street was peaceful. Every shop was closed, but one or two. Chicken Street, same. Yes, there were 5 million refugees. Because 1/3 of the population then was out of the country. It was very peaceful. Could travel. I did travel to Jalalabad on the road. Not a problem at all. So I think that let's be careful here. You know, we talk about yes, we need peace, but we're coming. One, just briefly, I don't think that the American public is cognizant of the degree to which Afghanistan has changed. And I don't just mean since the Taliban. I mean, even under the kingdom, and I lived there under the kingdom. This society has human capital that is just extraordinary, considering where it's coming from. We've made an investment in that, and I don't think that the American public has been aware of that. Then they talk about nation building, and that's a misnomer. Afghanistan is a nation. It struggles to be a state. Afghans know who they are, but they don't have the institutions yet solidly in place to be able to realize some of these objectives of security, opportunity, and justice. So we've got to get that message across, and unfortunately, we're up against people here in Washington who want to minimize what has been accomplished and what's worth saving, but it's got to be saved here. And it's not just, yes, of course, we have, since having helped this along, we do have some obligations, but ultimately it is an American security interest. To the extent to which we are, our word is trusted, that we have any credibility.
So I recognize that there's a number of us that would love to say more, but unfortunately, I think our time has come towards an end. But what I would like to say is I want to thank you all for coming. And Joan, if you would, I don't know if you'd like to say a few closing remarks, but one of the things that I'm hearing is that, you know, in order for us to maintain our credibility is really to demonstrate our continued support and commitment to the Afghan people. And I think that together we've accomplished quite a bit, and we still have a tremendous amount left to learn. And so I do hope that we are able to continue these conversations that we've only just started today. So we'll certainly be in touch and look forward to having some additional conversations. But I want to thank you all again and let Joan perhaps have the final word.
I also want to thank you all on behalf of Counterpart. This is an extraordinary conversation that only touched the surface, which is very frustrating for me personally. I am very anxious to talk about where the youth come into the story and how we bring these voices together. What has given me a great deal of hope is the joint commitment across the Afghans and the Americans in this room to find a path forward. And so I hope that whether it's Counterpart that convenes or another group that convenes, that this conversation continues. And thank you all for being part of this starting point today. So thank you.